Sometimes I do get a little impatient. I don't have the privacy that he thinks I deserve or want at that particular time, but he was the man in black, the outlaw poet of country gospel and rock, but behind that tough, voiced, calm look, Johnny Cash carried a storm of anger toward people he thought were fake traitors or reminders of penis. Life was full of addiction, love loss, and strong anger that lasted for many years. First on that list was Bob Dylan, a name whispered, not shouted. They weren't just musicians, they were prophets in the same storm, writing songs. Came from the same hurt. Johnny had penned his arms to Dylan in Nashville, helped him get into the special halls off country royalty, made a space for Jimin, a world that didn't always welcome outsiders. But as Dylan turned inward, mysterious, cold, unreachable agony watched their friendship fall apart. Hewitt met with thanks, he was met with distance. It's not anger, not betrayal in the loud way, but silence, the kind thought screams to Johnny. That silence was acne-wrapped in soft cloth. He had stood for Dylan when it mattered, and in return had became invisible in letters never sent. Johnny wrote not of hate, but of heartbreak, of a friend who forgot that fire that warmed him. Dylan didn't attack him, he erased him. And for Johnny Cash, amen, who loved loyalty like religion, that quiet dismissal was louder than any betrayal thing came. Elvis Presley, they rose a together like twin giants of the South, two sons of Sun Records to prophets in black, singing the hurt of a generation, but where Johnny clawed his way through the mud of his sins toward being better. Elvis let himself drown in fancy stuff. To Johnny, Elvis was a warning ghost. Long before he died, he watched the king trade tonus for glitter hymns for headliness. Johnny never wanted the fame, he feared it. And in Elvis, he saw what happened. A man lost track of his truth. Every note became a show and a very smile a mask behind closed doors. Johnny raged not at Elvis, but at what had become of him. He hated the handler's hangers on the fake palace that turned a raw, beautiful soul into a hollow statue. When Elvis's people began trading him like royalty and everyone else like servants, Johnny couldn't side. His anger he didn't want to bow. He wanted to scream what hurt most, waste that Johnny still loved him, or at least boy from Tupelo, who used to sing like salvation. But by the time the pills took hold and the jumpsuits got heavier, Johnny saw only sadness and felt only betrayal. He never called him an enemy, but in his eyes, Elvis had done the worst sin, not dying young, but dying forgotten by the man he once was, and fat left Johnny bitter, mourning not a rival but a fallen brother who'd never find his way back. Yea, it was not a very merry Christmas for me. That was when I was getting pneumonia, and that waist rough part, the surgery went Finthin came. Jerry Lee Lewis, a friend turned rival, then a bitter memory. Cash respected fire. He even lived in it, but Jerry Lee was a wildfire with no boundaries, destructive, crazy, and hungry for attention. He didn't just play wild, he was chaos, where Johnny turned pain into being better. Jerry Lee threw his demons at the world and dare it to flinch. They fought on everything: audience, women, even the very idea of God. During one drunk rant backstage, Jerry mocked Johnny's gospel years-long that his newfound faith was just a career trick. Johnny didn't trust with fists, but the silence that followed was like a volcano. It wasn't just an insult, it was a tear in something sacred, and the split got bigger. Jerry once showed up to a concert so drunk that he destroyed an entire dressing room, then pointed fingers at Johnny's crew to escape blame. It wasn't just unprofessional, it was betrayal. Cash stormed out, angry and embarrassed, and from that day forward erased Jerry from his world. He never spoke his name again. In interviews, not in books, not even to old friends, because to Johnny, Jerry Lee wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was proof that talent without truth was a curse, and for a man who believed being better had to be earned. Jerry's recklessness was a wound that never stopped bleeding. Waylon Jennings. Wassa, different story. Brotherhood turned cold, they were highway Men band mitzrobles, they had laughed in the face of Nashville's rules, toured like renegade sand, shared stories soaked in whiskey and blood, but pride, like a spark in dry grass, can burn even the strongest stridges. Waylon watched Johnny walk the narrow path of sobriety and salvation and couldn't stomach it. "You're not on office anymore," he reportedly sneered as Johnny traded backstage fights for Bible verses, what Waylon saw as betrayal. Johnny saw as survival, but neither would bend it. Wasn't hate at first. It watch Heartbreak. Johnny still cared, still wished Waylon would understand. But when Waylon publicly mocked Johnny's prize in concerts, calling them fake redemption theater, it struck a nerve too deep. That wasn't just making fun, it was a stab to the soul Johnny saw in Waylon, the man he used to barrack, less defiant, crumbling inside. Beauty stead of understanding, Waylon thrust in sand, so the warmth of brotherhood, tornado Cold War, they stood on stage. Yes, but not side by side, not truly. In interviews, Johnny grew tight-lipped about Waylon. So warmth was still there, the silence was louder than any outburst, because when someone who once carried your pain turns their back on your healing, that cut doesn't fade. It festers. The next wound came from Chris Christopherson. They wrote a together, drank together, prayed together, weren't just collaborators. They were brothers of the spirit, kindred rebels trying to find light through the music. But when Johnny's world began to crack in the 70s, when the pills blurred days and faith got weak, Christy disappeared, Johnny didn't need a spotlight or sympathy. He needed a hand, a voice, a reminder he wasn't alone. But Chris, overwhelmed or afraid, chose distance. "You vanished when I needed a hand," Johnny once told a friend, his voice low, not angry, but empty. That silence in his darkest hour felt like abandonment, and for a man already fighting ghosts, it became unforgivably. Tried to return, he wrote hymn letters soaked in regret, sent songs that reached for forgiveness, but Johnny had already built a fortress around his pennant. Inside it, Chris's name had been scratched out like a prayer, unanswered. When they finally met again, the hug was stiff, the handshake cold, no argument, no closure, just two men staring across a canyon carved by time and betrayal. And Johnny walked away knowing some friends didn't leave with anger. They fade, and that kind of loss cuts deepest of all. And a third jet of Cash's quiet anger was David Allen Coe, the rebel of rebels. Coe was William apologetic and wrapped in controversy, pushed boundaries. Johnny refused to even think about crossing lines of race, decency, and artistic integrity. His lyrics were filled with hate. His shows were spectacles of chaos, often designed to provoke rather than perform. Johnny didn't just disapprove, he was disgusted. Cash, a man who carried his sins like scars, couldn't stomach Coe's use of shock for attention. He saw him not as a rebel but as a dangerous showman, one whom stuck vulgarity for courage. It boiled over when Coe took aim at Johnny, himself mocking his recovery, his faith, and his past. "A preacher with a pill problem," Coe had said in a sneering interview. A quote that spread like poison through the industry. Johnny didn't respond with words. He responded with absence. Coe was banned from his tours, left off his guest lists, and erased from his personality in circles of young musicianship. His name came up. Johnny offered readily one sentence: "That's what the devil sounds like when he sings." With a smile, Johnny Coe wasn't just offensive, he was a threat to everything music should. A reflection of pain, not a performance of it. Their divide wasn't just moral, it was spiritual. Then there was Merle Haggard, perhaps the deepest car they were. Alley's once prison-born poet survivors who sang from the edge bed. While Johnny wore his darkness like armor, Merle saw it as competition. Fame came for them both, but Merle couldn't ignore how the spotlight stayed longer in Johnny. The public adored the man in black. To Merle, it felt like a betrayal of their shared grit. The rupture came quietly, but cut deeply. Merle accused Johnny of exaggerating his prison image, whispered words that spread like wildfire in Nashville. It wasn't just gossip, it was a direct attack on thievery soul Johnny had shown to the world. Knees Music wasn't a brand, it was his survival. And to have that questioned by Simone, he once considered a brother he turned. Admiration into pain, even Astley stood side by side on stage in later years. The bond had already broken there. Harmonies were hollow, their glances. Distant fans never saw the divide, but those closest did. Johnny never fought back publicly, but in his final journals, scribbled in shaky ink, heckled Merle, a man who mistook jealousy for justice, a line soaked in sorrow, not spite. In the end, Merle wasn't just a friend lost, he was a chapter closed. With regret, a reminder that some wounds don't bleed, but still never heal. These weren't field-line feuds. They were quiet heartbreaks, spiritual betrayals, and moments where pride collapsed into sorrow. Johnny Cash never needed to yell, his silence could destroy. Each name was a silent chord in a song that was never played. Some were wounds left open for decades, others were scars hidden beneath layers of gospel verses and gravel-toned refrains. These were not petty rivalries, were deep soul-twisting reckonings with men who mirrored his darkness or mimicked his light to the public. Johnny was a legend, but behind closed doors, Haggard. Ghosts' names etched into memory, not with hate, but with grief, didn't burn bridges. He watched them collapse and then walked alone through smoke. And in the quiet corners of his legacy, these names remain carved in shadow, echoing through his songs. Like ghosts, no one can see, but everyone can feel.